Can you imagine spending your whole life not knowing who your real father is? Not because nobody cared enough to tell you, but because even your own mother did not know the answer. That is the story you are about to hear. It involves a Hollywood legend, 3 different men, one heartbreaking secret, and a DNA test that changed everything. By the end of this video, you will understand why this is one of the strangest and most emotional family mysteries in Hollywood history. Her name was Patty Duke, and for decades, the world only knew half of her story. Patty Duke was one of the biggest child stars America had ever seen. She started acting when she was just 8 years old, and by the time she was a teenager, she was already one of the most talked about young actresses in the country. In 1962, when she was only 16, she played Helen Keller in a movie called The Miracle Worker. That role won her an Academy Award, making her the youngest actress to ever win an Oscar in that category at the time. While other teenagers were worrying about school dances and homework, Patty was standing on a stage holding a golden statue. Soon after that, she became a household name with her very own television show, The Patty Duke Show, where she played 2 identical cousins. Millions of families tuned in every week to watch her. On the outside, it looked like she had the perfect life. But behind the cameras, something very different was happening. The people who managed Patty's career as a child controlled almost every part of her life. They decided what she wore, what she said in interviews, who she was allowed to spend time with, and even how she was allowed to feel in public. She was still just a child, but she was treated like a product that needed to be managed and protected from anything that might hurt her image. These managers pushed her to work constantly and made decisions for her that no child should ever have to face alone. Years later, Patty admitted that these people mistreated her in ways that left deep scars, and because she was just a kid with no real power, nobody stepped in to protect her. There was no one in her corner reminding the adults around her that she was still growing up and still needed guidance instead of control. As she grew older, those wounds did not heal. Instead, they turned into something bigger. She began experiencing wild mood swings, moments of extreme energy followed by periods of deep sadness, and nobody around her understood what was happening. It would take many years before doctors finally gave her an answer. Patty was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a mental health condition that explained so much about her unpredictable behavior. In her later years, she became one of the most outspoken advocates for mental health awareness in Hollywood. But back in the 60s and 70s, there was no diagnosis, no treatment, and no understanding. She was simply a young woman falling apart in front of the entire country, and nobody around her had the tools to help her. This unstable mental state affected every part of her life, especially her relationships. Patty fell in love fast and hard, and her romances came and went just as quickly. Some of her marriages barely lasted more than a few days. She was often swept up in intense emotional highs where everything felt certain and passionate, only for that certainty to completely disappear once her mood shifted. It was during one of these chaotic periods that Patty found herself pregnant. And this is where her story stops being just a Hollywood biography and turns into one of the most tangled family mysteries in entertainment history. Because when her son was born in 1971, there was a serious problem. Patty was not sure who the father was. At the time, Patty was connected to 3 very different men. There was a young musician and promoter she barely knew. There was the son of one of the most famous couples in television history. And there was the man who would eventually raise her son as his own. All 3 of them were tied to her during roughly the same period of time, and because her memory and emotions were so scattered during this chaotic chapter of her life, she genuinely could not say for certain which one of them was the biological father of her baby boy. Imagine carrying that kind of secret for the rest of your life, and imagine being the child who grows up in the middle of it. That baby boy grew up to become Sean Astin, an actor many of you already know and love. If you grew up watching movies in the 80s, you probably remember him as young Mikey in The Goonies, the kid with a retainer and the big imagination who helped lead his friends on a treasure hunt that an entire generation still remembers fondly. He had that spark even as a kid, the kind of screen presence that made you remember his face long after the movie ended. Unlike a lot of child actors who fade away as they grow up, Sean kept working steadily through his teenage years and into adulthood, taking smaller roles and building real acting skills instead of chasing constant spotlight, without the dramatic flameouts so many young stars go through. Then came the role that changed his career forever. When Lord of the Rings was first announced, most of the attention went to actors like Elijah Wood and Ian McKellen. But as the movies came out, it was Sean's character, the loyal and brave Samwise Gamgee, who quietly became one of the most beloved characters in the entire trilogy, the friend who never gave up no matter how dark the journey became. Years later, he stepped in front of audiences again in Stranger Things, once again proving just how talented he really was. He even earned an Academy Award nomination himself, not for acting, but for directing a short film. Despite being the son of a famous actress, Sean never chased tabloid attention or leaned into scandal the way so many Hollywood kids do. He stayed grounded. But behind that calm and successful public image, there was a question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for his entire life, a question he could not ignore forever. So who exactly were the three men who might have been Sean's father? Let's start with the man almost nobody had heard of before this story broke. His name was Michael Tell, a writer and music promoter who was more or less unknown to the public. He met Patty in 1970 during an especially unstable time in her life, and the two had a short and unserious fling. It was not a real relationship in any traditional sense. But then Patty discovered she was pregnant and worried about how the public would react. She made a sudden decision. She married Michael Tell in a quiet civil ceremony with no fanfare at all. The marriage lasted only 13 days before it was annulled. For years afterward, Patty insisted that the marriage had nothing to do with love, and she firmly denied that Michael could possibly be the father of her child. In her mind, he was simply a name on a piece of paper, a mistake she wanted to forget as quickly as it happened. Nobody expected his name to matter much after that. They were wrong. The second man was someone with a much bigger name attached to him, Desi Arnaz Jr., son of television icons Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz Sr. from I Love Lucy. Desi Jr. was young, talented, and already considered Hollywood royalty. His relationship with Patty caused a real stir, partly because of their age difference and partly because Lucille Ball herself reportedly disapproved of the romance. Some reports say she tried to end it entirely, worried about her son being pulled into what she saw as an unstable situation, especially given how much media attention already followed her family everywhere they went. Still, Patty was convinced that Desi was the father of her baby, and for years, that is exactly what she told her son. The timeline seemed to line up, and Desi never publicly denied it, though he never confirmed it either. He mostly stayed quiet and avoided the media storm surrounding the whole situation. For a long stretch of Sean's childhood, this was simply accepted as the truth. Then there was the third man, the one who actually raised Sean and gave him his last name. John Astin, known to many as Gomez Addams from the Addams Family, married Patty in the mid-1970s. He legally adopted young Sean, and from that point forward, he was Sean's father in every way that mattered day to day. He was there for school events, family dinners, and everyday life. Patty and John even had another son together. For years, it looked like this family had finally found some stability after everything Patty had been through. Sean grew up believing, both emotionally and biologically, that John Astin was his real father. But here is where things start to unravel. Over the years, Patty's story kept changing. At times she said John was the father. Other times she insisted it was Desi. Sometimes she would dismiss both ideas completely and hint at someone else entirely without giving a clear answer. To outsiders, it might have looked like she was simply lying or being difficult. But people close to her understood something deeper. Patty was not lying on purpose. She was lost. Her bipolar disorder distorted her memories from those chaotic years, making it genuinely difficult for her to separate fact from fear, guilt, and confusion. She loved her son with her whole heart, but she could not give him the one thing he wanted most, a clear and certain answer about where he came from. For Sean, this uncertainty became harder to carry as he got older. He loved his mother deeply and respected the man who raised him. He was curious about Desi Arnaz Jr. as well. But eventually, the not knowing became too heavy to ignore. Things got even more complicated when he happened to meet a relative of Michael Tell, who suggested there might be a family connection between them. That single conversation planted a seed of doubt that would not go away. Sean realized that if he wanted real answers, he could not keep waiting for his mother to give them to him. He had to find the truth himself. So he made the difficult decision to take a DNA test, not out of anger or spite, but out of a deep need for closure and self-understanding. Reaching out to 3 different men, two of whom he barely knew personally, was not easy. John Aston, Desi Arnaz Jr., and Michael Tell all agreed to take part in the testing. Michael, in particular, had been almost entirely absent from Sean's life for decades. Once the tests were submitted, the waiting began, and it was agonizing. Days felt like weeks. Sean later admitted he was nervous about what the results might reveal, and how they might change the picture of his family that he had held onto his entire life. Would the answer bring him peace, or would it break something he had built his whole identity around? When the results finally came back, they revealed something nobody expected. The biological father was Michael Tell, the man Patty had been married to for less than 2 weeks decades earlier. The man who had almost completely disappeared from the story turned out to be the missing piece Sean had been searching for all along. For a moment, it must have felt like the ground shifting beneath his feet. But instead of anger or resentment, Sean responded with something far more graceful. He described the moment not as devastating, but as strangely peaceful. He later told reporters plainly, "If you want to know who I am, John Aston is my father, and Michael Tell is my biological father." In his mind, discovering the truth did not erase the love he had for the man who actually raised him. If anything, it deepened his appreciation for John, because now he understood something powerful. Blood may connect people biologically, but love is what truly makes a family. After the results came out, Sean faced a new and unexpected challenge. He now had to build some kind of relationship with a man who had never really been part of his life. Reports say their first meeting was calm and respectful rather than dramatic or emotional. Michael did not deny the results or try to avoid responsibility. Unlike the famous men in Sean's life, Michael had always lived quietly, working behind the scenes in the music industry rather than chasing fame. He never gave interviews about the situation and never tried to profit from his sudden connection to a well-known actor, which said a lot about his character. Getting to know him gave Sean a strange sense of familiarity, almost like recognizing pieces of himself he never understood before, small mannerisms and interests that suddenly made a little more sense. He has never spoken badly about Michael. In fact, in interviews, he described their bond as surprisingly powerful, saying he holds no resentment toward anyone involved, not Michael, not himself, and not Desi either. Now let's talk about how Patty herself reacted once the truth came out. This was not simply a headline for her. It was decades of buried guilt and confusion finally rising to the surface. Even after seeing the DNA results with her own eyes, Patty refused to fully accept them. She insisted her marriage to Michael Tell had never even been physically real, and she firmly believed the father had to be either John or Desi. In one particularly heartbreaking interview, she said she could support Sean's truth as long as her own truth was also respected, and that she knew what she believed to be true in her heart, no matter what science said. It was a raw, painful moment that revealed just how deeply her mental health struggles had shaped her entire understanding of her own life, and how hard it can be for someone to let go of a story they have told themselves for so long that it feels like fact. And yet, despite all of this confusion and denial, Sean never turned his back on his mother. He understood that she had lived through things most people could never imagine, battling an undiagnosed mental illness for years without any real treatment or support. He knew her heart, even when her choices had been messy or painful. Their bond remained strong until the very end. Sean once said that even through her darkest moments, including her divorce and her personal struggles, there was never a single moment where he doubted that his mother loved him. He described their relationship as being in a storm together, side by side. When Patty passed away in 2016, Sean created a foundation in her memory dedicated to mental health awareness, carrying forward the advocacy work she had cared so deeply about in her final years. He once described her, above everything else, as a warrior. Looking back now, Sean has made peace with a story that could have easily broken someone else. He does not choose between the three men who shaped his life. Instead, he honors each one for exactly what they gave him. John Aston may not share his DNA, but he was a man who helped with homework, showed up at school plays, and taught him what real fatherhood looks like day after day. In Sean's heart, John will always be dad in every sense that matters. His connection with Desi Arnaz Jr. never grew especially close, but Sean holds no bitterness there either. He understands that Desi was simply a young man caught up in a complicated and scandalous situation that was never entirely his to control. And with Michael, his biological father, Sean has built something quieter but meaningful, a calm understanding built on truth rather than history. In the end, Sean Astin's story is not really about a DNA test at all. It is about what family actually means when you strip away the biology and the headlines. He was raised by love, even when that love came wrapped in chaos and confusion. He searched for the truth, not to destroy his past, but to finally complete it. And when the answer finally arrived, he did not use it to rewrite the story of his childhood. He used it to understand himself more completely. His journey proves something powerful, that family is not always neat or simple. Sometimes it is complicated, messy, and full of unexpected turns. But real family is built on connection, choice, and the courage to embrace every part of your story, even the parts that do not make sense right away. So here is the question. If you were in Sean's position, would you have wanted to know the truth, no matter how complicated it turned out to be? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more untold Hollywood secrets.